evening.
Thank you all for being here and for considering what I have to say. My name is Danielle Romanuk and I'm a resident of St. Catharines. It seems to me that the two most important words in this bylaw debate are mandatory, as the title suggests, and unenforceable, as the content of the bylaw lays out. No person shall be required to provide proof of any of the exemptions. This means that the only true enforceable component of the bylaw is against a person who does not allow for exemptions or is trying to enforce under the bylaw that facial coverings are absolutely mandatory. The one time the word mandatory is used in the bylaw is in the title, which is a false claim. Requiring proof of the exemption under the bylaw is in violation of the bylaw, as well as Ontario's Personal Health Information Protection Act. Compliance on any level, therefore, has to be assumed as voluntary and should be advertised as such. And so I am here to encourage you to vote no on renewing the facial covering bylaw. The memorandum attached to Article 10 of this meeting schedule CAO 19-2020, update on Niagara Region's face covering bylaw, states that the region took an educational approach to enforcement, and the primary objective of the bylaw has been to educate the public about the importance of wearing face coverings in enclosed public places and gain voluntary compliance to reduce the spread of COVID-19. Had the bylaw been appropriately titled, the confusion and controversy surrounding the bylaw could have been mitigated. I have made multiple calls to the region, Public Health, Citizens First, Niagara Falls City Hall, my MP and MPP, and I even sent a letter to Regional Councillor Laura Yip expressing my concerns and asking over 120 questions that she only replied to yesterday after telling me on August 10th that she would be sending me a complete response. I waited over a month for her to tell me that the questions she would answer should be directed to other agencies with some copy and pasted information and links to the region website that were in no way direct answers to my very specific questions. This tells me that many issues were not considered by the region when they first passed the bylaw and still have not been, including informed consent and if masks are aiding in human trafficking. She ended stating, "It's unfortunate indeed that you're experiencing shaming from others. Sadly, other than speaking out against this publicly, as few of us have done, and the Niagara Region Public Health writing a lengthy list of exemptions into the bylaw, I'm not sure what else can be done to ensure people to show more compassion." I'm here to tell you that voting no on renewal and getting the word out that the bylaw was always unenforceable and will remain unenforceable no matter what is the least you can do. The region's educational approach did not reach me despite my efforts for asking for answers. All I wanted was clarity to the exemptions when I never needed one due to the unenforceable nature of the bylaw. I have suffered to the point where I'm having nightmares about wearing a mask and being surrounded by people in masks. I have been harassed, assaulted, and denied services vital to the maintenance of my mental health and physical disease and disability. And if the bylaw would have been titled properly from the start, there would have not been such need for education, and we might not all be sitting here for the next hour hearing arguments against it. In my experience, the controversy around the facial coverings bylaw stems from the erroneous notion that they are mandatory, with some citizens passionate about their blanket use and others passionate about the true meaning of the bylaw that allows for everyone to be exempt, as medical conditions is vague, and I can think of few people in my life who do not fit that requirement for exemption. I also wonder if under this provision that people with coronavirus would therefore be exempt. If this is the case, then would this also apply to asymptomatic carriers? Because that would make this entire bylaw unnecessary and illogical. If the basis of the bylaw is that there are people who have contagious medical condition that they are unaware of, yet anyone with a medical condition is exempt, then it's time to vote no and put an end to this psychological attack. Please vote no to the continuance of this deceiving bylaw that nullifies itself via the medical condition exemption loophole. At least consider making changes to the bylaw to ensure that its title reflects the content and meaning of the bylaw by removing the word mandatory. This would be one way to reduce confusion and ensure people's true voluntary compliance. The memorandum goes on to say, since the bylaw came into effect on July 31st, the vast majority of both businesses and residents have embraced the requirements and this educational approach has been proven very successful. Can we be certain that it is the educational effort that has been successful, or is it that the bylaw falsely claims in its title that they are mandatory, and so compliance is based on this egregious and erroneous error that the region failed to either notice or correct? More than misleading, the title is a false representation of the enclosed regulation. I was told over and over that it was my responsibility to print the bylaw and educate the people trying to force it against me, because the exemptions are the only true enforceable aspect. Vote no to this confusing and unenforceable bylaw, because by voting no, you get the same outcome as renewing the bylaw, since masking is currently unenforceable and it would remain that way in either case. If this bylaw is renewed, efforts should be made to remove all current posters and update them to include the true meaning of the bylaw and to let people know it is unenforceable, that their compliance is being voluntarily asked for and it is not mandatorily required. Efforts also need to be made to protect and inform those wearing facial coverings under duress by giving them practical measures that they can take to help asserting their human rights in the case of a store's public or employee policy that is in breach of our Ontario Human Rights Code or charter rights, for example, to liberty, by forcing people to behave in a manner contrary to their health or beliefs, as well as in opposition to Dr. Hergey's warnings of increased spread due to the unhygienic practice of mask handling and increased facial touching due to masking. I urge you to vote no. Furthermore, according to a public health representative, masks are a buyer beware product. As a consumer, I have not found a mask that I am willing to cover my mouth and nose with, let alone spend money on, as I am the one assuming the risk of wearing it. We have allowed our government to make too many decisions based on the unknown. We should be basing our decision on what we know, which is masks may or may not help and are largely untested in the capacity that they are being used and misused, like in restroom washrooms. They pose risks for people with medical conditions. They infringe on our rights. They are buyer beware and wear at your own risk products. They are being littered. They are causing stress and controversy, and there is no region-specific or even province-specific efficacy study to determine the impact they are having here, and if we can differentiate which cases are being spread by asymptomatic non-maskers compared to contaminated and improper mask use due to touching or improper storage, etc. There is a billboard on Thoroldstone Road between Garner and Townline facing east that states, "Wear a mask, no arguments," in an advertisement for Sullivan Injury Law. How are they allowed to put that up when A, mandatory masking cannot lawfully be enforced, and B, there are plenty of arguments, as I am sure you will hear tonight. I have not seen one regional billboard that says, "Masks are optional, inform yourself." On top of this, media in the region is informing the public with misleading headlines and a skewed version of events and their interpretation. For example, a review article titled, "Younger Niagara residents now comprise most COVID-19 cases," dated July 19th, which has a photograph of what looks to me like 13 teenagers on the beach being confronted by security guards, and goes on to explain that by younger residents, they mean people under the age of 60, which make up at least 60% of the population, and by most cases, they mean 55%. To be clear, the meat of what they are calling news was to tell us that 60% of the population is responsible for 55% of cases, again using the tactic of a misleading title, and in this case, a completely unrepresentative photograph that provokes fear via misinformation. But why do we even need to have a further conversation when unenforceable says it all? Say no to renewing a bylaw that is deceptive in its title and unenforceable in nature, meaning that people can continue masking regardless, and we can start to work on the real issues like how Niagara Region plans to make it through the winter with a reduced food supply due to the agricultural subsidies that led traditional farmers to leave harvest to rot, as well as a decimated gaming industry and crippled tourist industry that is more than ever in jeopardy of dying this winter, just like all the people who have lost their mental health services, including myself, and are dying at an increased rate due to overdose and suicide. Once again, I implore you, vote no. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. And as indicated at the conclusion of all the presentations, members of council will have the opportunity to direct questions to any of the delegates.